Topic tonight is the journey. We get really the first leg of the journey. We did get them across the Red Sea last time, but now we get kind of this first leg of the journey in the wilderness, in the Sinai Peninsula. And so let's take a look here, starting in verse 22 of chapter 15. So we left off the middle of chapter 15 last time. Chapter 15, starting in verse 22, is where our action picks up. Now, I talked about a couple weeks now, back and forth between action and instruction. Okay? Tonight's passage is action. We're going to see events happen, and they're moving and different things. Next week, they're camped out, and they get some instruction. And so there's no action next week. There's hearing God speak. Okay? But this week, there's a lot of action in our story. So, beginning in verse 22, they had just crossed the Red Sea. Very first thing that that happens to them is they go 3 days without water. 3 days without water is a lot of days without water. Now, some of y'all don't ever drink water, but you're still getting water from some source, okay? They did not have any water, and that is a very difficult thing to deal with. And so, of course, they did what anybody would do, is they started complaining, grumbling and complaining about being thirsty. They got to a place called Marah, and there was water there, but it was bitter, and so they could not drink it. And so they're complaining, and Moses goes to the Lord, and the Lord says, take this tree and put it in the water. And so he put this tree in the water. I don't know if it was a branch or whatever, but put this tree in the water, and it turned the water from bitter to sweet. And so they were able to drink it. So this is the first instance here of the Lord providing for them, for their needs in the wilderness. And so God says to them, to the Israelites, if you diligently heed my word, I won't put anything on you like I put on the Egyptians. And he says that there's some title, some name that goes with this character piece of God. And so he says, I am Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. So then they moved on to the next place, which was Elim, E-L-I-M. And there were 12 wells of water there and 70 palm trees. Why they couldn't just hang out there for the next 40 years, I don't know, but the Bible doesn't tell us, so we'll go on. All right, into chapter 16. Remember, the Lord is leading them, so he did not lead them to that place called Elim for any length of time more than he deemed it was necessary. And so he brought them out of Elim, and they didn't have any food. Not exactly sure when the food ran out, but you remember that they came out of Egypt with food. And so here they are in the middle of the wilderness, and they have no food. And so, of course, they do what any of us would do. They begin grumbling and complaining again. This is the same word, same Hebrew word here for grumbling and complaining. Grumble or complain or murmur. Okay? They said to Moses, we had meat and bread in Egypt. At least we had meat and bread. And so we could make a sandwich. Okay. And so he goes to the Lord again. And the Lord says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rain down bread from heaven. And he gives a lot of instructions about this bread. They're supposed to do thus and so with the bread. They're supposed to collect it each day. They're not supposed to eat, they're not supposed to hold on to it, hoard it, or store it overnight. Where they take whatever is enough for each person, which is about a half gallon. They eat what they can eat for that day, but they don't hold on to it overnight. They also collect this stuff for 6 days, and they don't go out on the seventh day to collect the manna. Because that's the Sabbath and they're not supposed to go work. And so they're supposed to collect double on the sixth day. And that will last them for the seventh. Now, why it goes bad every night, but it doesn't go bad on the sixth night? Because it's God. I mean, So that's the instructions for how to deal with this manna. Which, of course, they don't all follow. But In addition to the manna which comes every morning, the quail come in the evening. So they have quail coming in the evening on the first evening there that that this story happens, that God says to do this. So the quails come in the evening, the manna comes in the morning. When the manna came and the dew was on the ground, and when the dew lifted, and here's all this stuff, and they said, what is it? And that's what manna means. Manna means what? What? And so Moses said, this is the stuff that you're supposed to take and make into bread. Some of them kept it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. Now, I was thinking about this. We're talking about over 1 million people, right? It's not like, so you might read this and you say, well, Moses went to the ones and said, well, you kept it, Over 1 million people, okay? It stank all over because of the ones, let's say 5,000 of them didn't do what they were supposed to, all right? Well, the whole camp smells what the 5,000, thank you very much, 5,000, right? So it's not like we're going around pointing the fingers, but it's like somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, and we can tell it by our nose. You know what I mean? So this bread, this manna bred worms and stank. So there you go. Do what God says. Then on the seventh day, of course, some people went out to try to collect it on the seventh day, and when God said no. So they get all that settled. We're going to go out once a day. We're going to do what God said. We're going to get this stuff. We're not going to keep it overnight. We're not going to go out on the seventh day. They learned their lesson on that pretty quick, that was the deal. Now, obviously, God is trying to teach them through that what? Obedience, yeah, for sure, but also trust in a daily provision, or in some cases, a 2-daily provision, right? You don't have to go ahead of God. If God says this is what we're going to do, we don't have to add to that. And so that's a good lesson there. Well, my very next point is that God said to put some of the manna into a container and put it into the Ark of the Covenant. And so this stays there. If the Ark of the Covenant is still buried under the Temple Mount or something, as some people claim it is, I guess it's still there to this day. So how does that manna breed worms? How does that manna stay fresh? Again, we don't know, other than it's God and he can do what he wants. So anyway, that's the story of the manna and the quail. Moving on to chapter 17. They move on in their journey, again in the Sinai Peninsula there, and they camp at a place called Rephidim. And when they camp at Rephidim, again, there is no water. So there was no water, now there's no food, and now there's no water again. I want you to notice a different word. The word for grumbling and complaining and murmur happens again. So all three of these times, chapter 15, 16, 17, the Israelites grumble, complain, murmur. But they do something else in chapter 17. They do something else on this second time that they're without water. Something a little bit more serious. It says that the people contended with Moses. And that word has, I didn't write down all the meanings, but it has a stronger meaning. And one of the meanings is to bring a lawsuit. So it's really more of a, hey, you're wrong here. It's not just I'm complaining because I'm hungry. It's you are to blame. And it's so serious that when Moses approaches the Lord this time, he says, they're going to stone me. You don't just read that and say, oh, they're going to stone me. Okay. No, they were really furious and ready to kill him for leading them into this place where they had no water, no food, and no water again. So God says, strike the rock with your staff and water will come out. So God makes water to come out of a rock, which provides water for them to drink. And so they drank from the water from the rock. Okay. Moses called the name of this place Massa and Meribah, which means temptation and contention. And I've talked about this before, even just this year, because they said, is the Lord among us or not? We need to be it's one thing to complain to God or to say, God, what's going on here? Where is that coming from in your motive? There are different ways of asking the Lord, what's up here? You know? One is from a place of wanting to know what's up. Another one is from a place of we are taking the upper hand over God and telling him the way it should be. Or even questioning, is he with us? Are you there, God? And that's where we really have more serious repercussions when we get into that kind of a mindset. And so don't get into that kind of a mindset. All right. End of chapter 17, we get the story of they are at Rephidim when the Amalekites attack. So Amalek, the Amalekites attack. And this is the story where, first of all, Moses basically makes Joshua into a general. Maybe he already was the general, but Moses says, Joshua, you go, get the fighting forces ready to go out and fight on tomorrow. And I'm going to go up to the top of the hill, and I'm going to hold out my staff. And so as long as he was holding his arms up, they were winning. When his arms dropped, they didn't win. So Aaron and Hur came and held his arms up, and they had victory all the way until sundown. And so the Lord brought the victory there against the Amalekites. God says of the Amalekites, I will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Woof. And then at that point, Moses builds an altar and calls its name Yahweh Nisi, Jehovah Nisi, which is the Lord is my banner, which has to do with God being the source of victory, the source of victory. All right, into chapter 18. This is where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, comes from. He is the priest of what? Midian. He's a Midianite, and so he comes to see Moses. He's heard that Moses is there and encamped at Mount Sinai. And he brings Moses' wife, his daughter Zipporah, and his two sons, Gershom and Eleazar. So they get a nice little family reunion. They get to talk to each other about, hey, how's it been going? And so Moses tells Jethro how it's been going and tells him about all the things that God did in Egypt. And Jethro is taken by that and says, you know, God is God. He's on the move. He's doing good things. Then Moses goes to judge the people, and Jethro sees how Moses goes out and people are coming with different disputes and so forth, and Moses is saying, well, this person is right, like a judge in a courtroom. And so he's taking precious time and energy doing this, and Jethro says to him, well, let me make a suggestion here. This is way too much for one man. You should delegate underlings, somebody over 1,000, somebody over 100, let me get the numbers right. Rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, rulers of 10s. And so you have this tiered kind of approach, government, if you will, but really judicial. A little bit like our judicial system where we have different courts that go up all the way to the Supreme Court, a little bit like that. And so Jethro suggests this, and Moses says, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So he implements it. So in this story, we should not take this to be prescriptive of anything in particular for us today. We should not take from this story that, for example, this is the way we should do church government, or this is the way we should do national government, or anything like that. But yet there is a principle here that's a general principle that's good, which is that it's delegating is good. Having tiers of authority is good in general. It will get the job done. It's pragmatic, etc. And so we have a good principle here for us to lean on without having an exact prescription for some particular thing that we should be doing today. All right. That brings us to the end of our portion for tonight. I just want to read the very beginning of the next chapter, which is the beginning of next week's talk, which is chapter 19. Beginning of chapter 19 says this: in the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. So we're getting the timeline here. It's been 3 months since the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. On the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, for they had departed from Rephidim, that's where they had fought the Amalekites, and had come to the wilderness of Sinai. They camped in the wilderness at the mountain of God, and this is where Jethro came out to meet them. So Israel camped there before the mountain. This is Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai or the mountain of God. All 3 of these terms are used to describe this mountain. Verse 3, Moses went up to the mountain of God, or went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. And so next week we'll pick up with what the Lord says to him there on the mountain. That gets us our journey to Mount Sinai from the Exodus, from the crossing of the Red Sea. Second look segment tonight is going to be short and sweet. I thought that we would take a look at the names of Yahweh, the names of Jehovah. So we have 2 of these names in this one. We have 2 of these names right here in this one passage, which is pretty cool because they are kind of spread out. And many of these names only appear one time in the whole Bible. And so we have 2 of these names in our text tonight. So I thought it was a good time to bring this up. So here they are, and we'll go through. There's 9 of these names where it has Jehovah or Yahweh. We've talked about that before. The 4-letter Hebrew word for God's name, God's proper name, like Gabriel or Jeff, right? And this is the word that the Hebrew scribes would not write in the Bible, but rather they would write in the Lord as a kind of a soften it, because they did not want to take the Lord's name in vain. We write it in our English, that we write it as all caps Lord. In some translations, they actually write Yahweh. But this is, again, the thing that they would wash their whole bodies before they would write this name of God every time they would do it. So pretty cool there. But these particular names are Yahweh or Jehovah with another modifier. So we get a glimpse into some of the character elements of God. And so here they are. First one, in no particular order, they're just the order that I have listed here. Jehovah Rapha is the Lord who heals, or Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals. Exodus 15:26 is the only occurrence of this particular title of God. It is in our passage from tonight, and it is in the context of in chapter 15 where they Moses turned the water sweet with the tree. God says about the Israelites, if you diligently heed my word, I won't put anything on you like I put on the Egyptians, for I am Jehovah Rapha, your healer. So that is that particular name. Next one is Jehovah Nisi, or Yahweh Nisi. The Lord is my banner. And again, this one came from our text tonight, Exodus 17:15. It's the only place that occurs in the Bible. The Lord is my banner, again, having to do with victory coming from God. Jehovah Ra'ah, or Yahweh Ra'ah, the Lord my shepherd. So this comes from Psalm 23. Jehovah Shammah, or Yahweh Shammah, the Lord is there. Where? Everywhere. He is omnipresent, but the Lord is there. This is Ezekiel 48:35. Again, this is the only occurrence of this particular title of God. The next 4 for us to look at. The next one is more difficult to pronounce. Jehovah, or Yahweh Tsidkenu. Okay. The Lord our righteousness. the Lord our righteousness. This only occurs 2 times. I believe they're both in Jeremiah. Okay. Jehovah Mekadishkem, the Lord who sanctifies you, or the Lord who makes you holy. There are only 2 of these, and the first one occurs in Exodus 31. We haven't got to it quite yet. Okay, the other one that we've seen already is Jehovah Jireh, or Yahweh Yireh. The Lord will provide. And we saw that in what passage or story? The what? Genesis 22, Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain. Where's the lamb? The Lord will provide. Okay. This is Genesis 22, Jehovah Jireh, or Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. Okay. And then the last one on this page, Jehovah Shalom, or Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is peace. This comes from Judges 6:24. And then the last one, which is the one that appears more than any other in the Bible, is Jehovah Sabaoth, or Yahweh Sabaoth, which means the Lord of hosts. This is, again, God's military title, essentially the commander-in-chief of the army of heaven, if you will. And this word is used 285 times. Maybe perhaps most familiar would be the Isaiah 6, Holy, 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 Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Okay. So, cool little look at the names. Of course, there are other names of God, of course. But these are the ones that have that Jehovah something. Okay. All right. Finally, wrapping up here with the personal practical application. Again, I mentioned it last week, but wanted to make sure that you understand that this application time is meant to be personal and practical. In other words, what we learned tonight, what can you take home with you? What can you turn over in your mind and kind of live with and let it seep into you? That is the point of this application time. And so in our application time, I want to talk a little bit about complaining. I will preach just a little bit, but not much. Let me read to you, before I show you that, let me read to you from Philippians chapter 2, and it's verses 14 and 15. Okay? We saw in our account tonight that the Israelites complained / grumble / murmur. And then the third time it came around, they did even more than that. They really pointed the finger and brought an accusation or a lawsuit. It's not like they took Moses to court, you know what I mean? But brought that accusation. Okay, and God wasn't happy with that. Okay, so that's that story back then. What does that have to do with us today? Does God feel the same way about that with us today? And I already mentioned a little bit about what is your inner motive when you're complaining. There are different ways to complain. None of them are great, but some are less great than others. Okay? So look at this in Philippians 2:14. The bottom line is here, even in the new covenant, we're not supposed to be grumbling and complaining. That's the short takeaway. Let's look at what it says. Do all things without complaining and disputing. Let's look at that again. Do how many things? All. Philippians 2:14. Do all things without complaining and disputing. We'll come back and talk about what those words mean in just a second. Verse 15, here's why. So that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that I, Paul, may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. Paul's writing to the church at Philippi, which is the best church around, as far as the letters we have from Paul in the New Testament. And even them, he's saying, don't grumble and complain, so that you may become blameless and harmless. In other words, you may grow in the things of God, you may bear fruit, etc., etc. You can do what you're supposed to be doing, In other words, grumbling and complaining keeps you from doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is growing in the Lord. And if you keep yourself from doing what you're supposed to be doing and you don't grow in the Lord, Paul is concerned that he will actually be able to rejoice in the last day, that he's not running his race in vain or labored in vain. Do right. Do right. Every day, every hour, every minute. And I know it's hard. But do right so that you can not thwart your own progress in the Lord. So that at the last day, we will find out that nobody's efforts on your behalf have been in vain. Now, what was that? It is a good word. Amen. Let's hear what these words mean, though. Because we can say grumbling and complaining, and we get an idea of what that means. And that's probably 70% of it. But it's a little bit more than that. Look at the word complaining. First of all, different translations. Complaining and disputing. Grumbling and arguing. Okay? Here's what the word complaining means. A murmur. Murmuring. Muttering. A secret debate. Or a secret displeasure not openly avowed. Don't do that, whatever you do. In all things, not that. In all things, not that. Not murmuring, not secret displeasure, not openly avowed. Okay? Part of that secret business goes to holding onto offense. We're starting to kind of get in, if you have like a word map, I think you're starting to get into that territory a little bit. Things that can result in bitterness. Okay? So that's complaining or grumbling. How about disputing or arguing? That word means this. The thinking of a man deliberating with himself. A thought, inward reasoning. I'm big on reasoning. God has given us a brain to use it, and we have reasoning ability, and we should use it. But there is a way to reason yourself out of what you know to be true, or what you could know to be true if you would take it on faith. Purpose or design, a deliberating question about what is true. Questioning about what is true. This goes back to, is the Lord among us? You're questioning, it goes to doubt, in a deep doubt in your heart. In other words, the opposite of faith. Hesitation or doubting, these are still what it means to be arguing / disputing. Hesitation, doubting, disputing, and arguing. Okay. In everything, don't do that. Okay. So, personal practical application, let's talk about it. The Israelites severely tested and tempted God with their grumbling and complaining. According to Philippians 2:14, we should not complain either. Take some time to consider what you might give up grumbling about. What are some things that okay, that was me. Yeah, I grumble about such and such. Okay, I need to stop doing that. Okay. And what positives, let's replace that with what we can concentrate on. Okay. Don't just have a vacuum there, because now I'm not thinking about all my negative thoughts, but what positive thoughts can we replace it with? In other words, practicing gratitude and all the rest. Read Philippians 4:8 while you're at it. That's the one that talks about all the things to set your mind on. Okay? So take a few minutes and talk through some of these things in your groups, please.